if we respect the environment, it will respect us. So we all have to play our part.
We were really in trouble of losing some species in my lifetime. And this can wreak havoc on the balance of the ecosystem.
People need nature, and people must take care of nature.
I am part of the next generation that have to make sure that this place survives.
It is our responsibility as the two-leggeds to try to foster good relationships with the earth. And it's beginning now.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Mthembu and I'll be your moderator for this event. Today, we're talking about the state of play in nature conservation in 2022, paying specific mind to the science-based global proposal to conserve at least 30% of the planet's lands and ocean by 2030. Speakers will share their insights and expertise on the significant benefits that biodiversity conservation offers South Africa, its people, the economy, and the environment. Please note that you're more than welcome to quote directly from the webcast. This is on record, and the content is available for immediate release. But first, let me introduce our speakers for today. Mr. Ruth Mthembu is an environmental communications specialist and oceans advocate. Dr. Enric Sala is the explorer in residence at the National Geographic Society, and is also the founder and executive director of Pristine Seas, which is dedicated to ocean conservation. Mr. Sineguguzukulu is a Ponderland conservationist and educator. Dr. Rashid Sumaila is a professor at the Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries at the University of British Columbia. Ms. Merrisa Naidoo is a youth coordinator at Youth for MPAs in South Africa. Mrs. Makhoba Dlamnini is the Deputy Director of Communications at Wild Trust, which is a program of wildlands. To help set the context for this call, I'd like to start by providing an overview of the 30 by 30 proposal. The catastrophic loss of nature poses a threat as serious as climate change to the future of humanity. The loss imperils our clean air, clean drinking water, the prosperity of communities, our health, all while worsening the impacts of a changing climate. Some 60% of the world's terrestrial wildlife populations have been lost since the 1970s, while 70% of the ocean's big fish have been killed in the last century alone. Overwhelming scientific evidence shows that conserving at least 30% of our planet's land and ocean can not only curb biodiversity loss, but also store carbon, help prevent future pandemics, and bolster economic growth. It's a quadruple win. Experts have calculated that we must protect at least 30% of the world's land and ocean in order to prevent catastrophic outcomes of our climate and biodiversity. But today, only 15% of land and 7% of our global ocean are protected. Protecting 30% of our entire planet by 2030 is an ambitious but achievable goal. It's important to clarify that it is a global rather than national goal. To achieve it, all countries must contribute to it. Indigenous rights must be respected and conservation efforts must be properly funded. This year, the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity will hold a global conference to decide the next 10-year plan to stop extinction and halt biodiversity loss. and a group of countries called a High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People was launched by Costa Rica to champion this global goal of 30 by 30. As of today, their membership includes more than 80 countries across Africa, Asia, Europe, Oceania, and the Americas. UN negotiations begin in 1 month, and as one of just 17 biodiverse countries in the world, South Africa has a unique opportunity to become a champion of this 30 by 30 target before the upcoming meeting. Our event today hopes to reveal how much this will be beneficial to nature and the people across the country and across the world. Some logistics before we get started. Our speakers will offer brief remarks, some of which have been pre-recorded. We will have time for questions following their remarks, and if you have a question during a briefing, please enter it into the chat and address it to all participants or in the Q&A box. Please enter your name, media outlet or organization, question, and the speaker you'd like to address the question to. We would like to cover as many questions as possible. But just to note that all participants will be muted during this briefing. And with that said, I will hand over to Ruth Mthembu, who will describe the Biodiversity Crisis and her work helping preserve the wild coast. She will also explain how 30 by 30 can set South Africa up for a sustainable future. Please go ahead, Ruth.
Thanks, Thembisa. So what I'm about to talk about ultimately highlights what our diverse cultures have taught for many centuries, that growth is only real and possible when shared with nature. The most important asset in the world is nature. Resilience alone cannot restore it. Africa needs regeneration politically, economically, socially, and most importantly, environmentally. Nature is in a state of crisis, threatened by habitat loss, pollution, overexploitation, invasive species, and climate change. 1 million plant and animal species face extinction, many within decades, because of human activity. Currently, only 15% of the world's land and 7% of the ocean has been protected. Overwhelming scientific evidence shows that conserving at least 30% of our land and ocean will curb biodiversity loss, store carbon, prevent future pandemics, and bolster economic growth. Expanding and improving protected areas has an essential role to play, especially in the ocean. This type of protection would ultimately renew and regenerate the very environment that we depend on. Globally, the ocean has been estimated to contribute a total of $21 trillion per year to human welfare, with approximately 60% of this from coastal and shelf environments. Now, zooming in on our continent of Africa, it is widely known that we are rich in natural resources. But unfortunately, the economic benefit has arguably not trickled down to those who need it most. And this makes it very difficult for many of us to see the connection between nature and the economic benefits derived. And what has fueled Africa's current state is large debt, weak economies, a legacy of colonialism, a high poverty index, and a high dependence on the direct use of natural resources. This has made it very, very difficult for Africa to play its part in catching up to the global goal of 30% ocean protection by 2030. Difficult, but not impossible. After having painted quite a grim picture, please allow me to share a win that South Africa recently secured for the environment. Prior to 2018, only 0.4% of the waters around South Africa were protected. The continuous hard work of scientists, civil organizations, and government took us to 5% ocean protection in the form of marine protected areas, also known as MPAs, in October 2018. And this is a win for biodiversity because we have a representative network of MPAs, more protection for critical biodiversity, increased fisheries yield, and a boost for much needed jobs and livelihood. In South Africa, the combined economic benefits from coastal resources are estimated to be around 35% of the country's annual GDP. Coastal tourism has been estimated to generate approximately 13.5 billion rand to the South African economy annually. So one cannot deny the importance of nature underwriting functioning societies. And if sustained really carefully, our annual GDP can only grow even more. But one size does not fit all. A one-size-fits-all approach does not work for a continent as complex as Africa. The unique nature of every country does not put us on the same playing field. Our continent is bombarded with many challenges, including gender-based violence, corruption, lack of political will, human trafficking, and poverty. This does not mean that we cannot forge ahead looking after our planet, but our seemingly laissez-faire approach to the challenges mentioned has resulted in us not achieving reform, healing, and ultimately protection of humans and nature. Regeneration requires three things. Firstly, action. And this would mean the realization of the crippling challenges that we face. Secondly, a determination to solve these, which would include stronger laws, stronger enforcement. And lastly, the ability to give the environment the attention it rightfully deserves. Experts have calculated that we must protect an absolute minimum of 30% of the world's ocean in order to prevent catastrophic outcomes for our climate and biodiversity. 30 by 30 is an ambitious goal, but achievable. So what has South Africa done to work towards contributing to this global goal for a more prosperous and healthier future? Well, firstly, in South Africa, there's currently a drive for marine protection to increase to 10%. This would send a really strong signal to other African states to support increased ocean protection and achieve the global target of what science tells us we need, at least 30% fully protected global ocean space by 2030. Secondly, addressing these challenges also looks like simply saying no for the sake of protecting our ocean. So an example would be Shell. Recently, Shell was granted mining exploration rights along the wild coast of South Africa, but youth organizations, environmental lawyers, and scientists came together to apply for an urgent interdict to halt this, and it was successful. So what's left is to apply to have the mining rights reviewed and set aside. So can you see what the power of coming together to say no can do? Lack of protection anywhere is lack of protection everywhere. Our future depends on preventing the collapse of the natural systems that provide our food, clean water, clean air, and stable climate. In order to preserve these services, we must protect enough of the natural world to sustain them. After all, it is less costly to conserve nature than to restore it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Enric Sala, who will provide a clear overview of why 30 by 30 target is critical to sustain and support our life system and why it is the global target that South Africa should support. Please go ahead, Enric.
Thank you so much for participating today. In the short time that I have, I want to give you 6 key reasons why I believe that it makes sense for South Africa to support the target of protecting 30% of the planet's land and ocean by 2030. 1. We scientists have conducted many studies and found that protecting 30% of the planet is the absolute minimum required to curb biodiversity loss. Conserving the right 30% of the land could reduce the extinction risk of nearly 9 out of 10 endangered species and safeguard half of the world's vulnerable carbon stocks that are stored in vegetation and soils. Any reduction in the global target would go against the science and our best interest. 2. Protecting 30% is good for economic growth and can create jobs. SANBI found that there are 420,000 biodiversity-related jobs in South Africa, and every job involved in protecting biodiversity makes possible 5 jobs in economic sectors that use nature. The evidence is clear. Expanding conservation does not conflict with economic development, but actually, every dollar invested in nature produces at least $5 in economic output. Therefore, nature conservation should be a core pillar of economic development strategies. 3, protecting 30% of the planet would require less than 0.2% of the global GDP. Donor governments are already increasing their commitments to finance biodiversity, and Jeff Bezos and other philanthropists had just committed $5 billion and are prioritizing funding to the countries that are committed to the 30 by 30 target. 4, 30 by 30 is not a national target. It is a global target. Not all countries are expected to have the same responsibilities. In some cases, protecting 30% nationally could be impractical, while in others it may be inadequate in terms of safeguarding the most important places for biodiversity. But the first step is to get a global agreement to protect and conserve 30% at the Convention on Biodiversity COP15 this year. Then how much each country protects should be a sovereign decision, made in conjunction with communities and scientists. 5, over 80 governments are already supporting 30 by 30 through the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. This initiative was started by Costa Rica, and half of the members are from the Global South, with 24 members from the African continent. And 6, the 30 by 30 target is not just about expanding lines on a map. The target is about improving both the quality and quantity of areas for conservation and ensuring equitable governance and effective management. The inclusion and leadership of indigenous peoples and free, prior, and informed consent are critical to the success of this target. South Africa is a global leader in conservation and communal land management. 30 by 30 can simultaneously address the twin crises of nature loss and climate change, while also improving the lives of all South Africans. This is a global effort, and the world needs South Africa's leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Enric. Next, we'll hear from Merrisa Naidoo, who will talk about youth activism and how water and food depend on a healthy environment. Please go ahead, Merrisa.
Freeze. Do you hear that? That's the sound of time slipping away from us. Valuable time that we should be using to protect our planet, its people, and the future generations. Who am I? I am a youth that belongs to South Africa, one of only 17 mega-diverse countries in the world. And just like our rainbow nation, I wear the pride of our biodiverse lands and seas like a badge of honor, one that's meant to be protected, respected, and revered. Today, I represent one of the many youth voices that belong to a movement known as the Youth for Marine Protected Areas, or the Youth for MPAs, who are making every effort they can to ensure the protection of South Africa's prized waters. The Youth for MPAs can be accurately described as a movement of young, opportunistic, unique, tenacious human beings, aka the youth. This group of young people, along with partner organizations in 2021, hosted the first African Youth Summit on the continent. After consciously recognizing the urgency to protect 30% of our planet by 2030, they collectively brought youth voices from all over Africa to foster ownership of the global goal, but with an African perspective. And before I begin to read to you a short excerpt of the African Youth Summit statement, I would like to very boldly state, I am not here to inspire. I am here on behalf of South Africa and Africa's youth to reiterate what those who have come before me have said. We have enough data. We have enough science, we have enough noise, and we have enough of everything. But unfortunately for us, urgency has never cared about time, and time is simply not on our side. In the voices of Africa's youth, the youth of Africa believe that ocean protection should be kept top of mind, and that all stakeholders should act with greater urgency and accountability. In that same breath, I would like to answer the question, why does South Africa need to provide their support to this global target? Africa is undeniably the epicenter of the planet, a place where life originated. While South Africa only occupies 2% of the world's surface, it is home to about 10% of the world's plant species and is 1 out of 4 countries with the richest rays and sharks. South Africa has been a leader of the African continent in many aspects, and by providing support for the global 30 by 30 target, our country would be paving a way to garner the support of other African countries to increase the protection of the natural treasures that lie within our continent. Our time is now, not just for me, or for yourself, or for a few thousand, but for the 60 million lives, South African lives, whose every second breath depends on the health and resilience of our oceans. Protection now will be safeguarding our future. And if that wasn't reason enough, then here's why. 392 youth from South Africa and Africa have a vision of ensuring a sustainable future where marine life and society benefit from the presence of MPAs and protected areas. The environmental benefits of protecting land and sea translates into the protection of biodiversity, the mitigation of climate change, carbon sequestration, and protecting some of the critical habitats on our planet. The social benefits of protecting land and sea translates into increased food security, the conservation of cultural and spiritual heritage sites, reduced risks of future pandemics, and onto the economic benefits of protecting our land and sea. We would be supporting fisheries, sustainable hunting, job security, and ecotourism. Protecting 30% of the planet outweighs the costs by a ratio of at least 5 to 1, and that after the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. The nature sector is projected to increase and grow by 4 to 6% per year, compared to less than 1% of agriculture, timber, and fisheries. And here is my last message for you. 30 by 30 represents the minimum down payment present generations must make now to keep our global life support system, our oceans, in operation. As the planetary guardians of tomorrow, we are extremely concerned about our future, and we will not stand by and allow the next generation to believe that we were a generation that left them with a planet that is beyond fixing. We will be and are the generation that chose to fix things. Thank you.
Thanks, Merrisa. We will now hear from Sineguguzukulu, who will tell us about how important indigenous and communal land rights are for protecting biodiversity and how 30 by 30 must strengthen this land tenure aspect. Please go ahead, Sinegugu.
My name is Sineguguzukulu, coming from Ponderland along the east coast of South Africa. And adjacent to our lands, we have an MPA, a marine protected area, which is known as the Ponderland Marine Protected Area. These MPAs are very critical for the local communities, for indigenous people, because their livelihood is dependent on the marine living resources. It is therefore very critical that if we are to achieve the 30 by 30, that is protecting 30% of the oceans by 2030, that we are able to give the local communities, the indigenous people in their territories, an opportunity as well, because they are dependent on these natural systems. Globally, we know that indigenous people in their territories are the best stewards that we have. 80% of the global biodiversity is still in good state and well protected within the territories of indigenous people. It therefore is no brainer that they should play a key role in protecting the marine ecosystems. Also, if we are to achieve the 30-30 goal, it is important that indigenous people within their territories play a critical role in the management of this. So it also calls for the training and the capacity building and giving them the requisite skills that would enable them to be able to protect these marine protected areas. It means in terms of the management of these MPAs, the monitoring, the law enforcement, they need to be at the forefront of those. And where they are not able to do so, they must be trained. But also there are challenges currently which we see within the marine protected areas, is the fact that those local communities, they are the ones that their lives are being made very difficult by the law enforcement agencies. They are being persecuted, they are being killed, they are being arrested. And that has got to stop if we are to achieve these 30 by 30 goals. So the indigenous people have got to be at the center, at the core of these MPAs if we are to be successful. So also, we must also bear in mind that these MPAs are quite critical in terms of adapting to climate change. Nature-based solutions are one way to achieve the ecosystem-based adaptation to address and to adapt to climate change. And if we know that climate change leads to the loss of biodiversity at an alarming rate globally, and therefore taking steps to protect and to manage the marine ecosystems through establishment of MPAs is going to enhance livelihoods and be able to make sure that people are able to adapt to climate change. So these nature-based solutions, these EBA, ecosystem-based adaptations, they need to be very critical, and we need to make sure that local communities, indigenous people, they play a pivotal and a leading role in terms of the management of these as the people who are standing to directly benefit. Challenges that we currently have is that the major culprits when it comes to MPA are the sophisticated people, the trawlers that come, for instance, in our area. They come during the night, they switch off engines, they come and they exploit those marine resources. And without people watching, we do not have the government boats to monitor what's happening. And that has got to be brought to an end. And the patrolling as well needs to be done by local people. I thank you.
Thank you, Sineguguzukulu. Now we'll hear from Makhoba Dlamnini, who will talk about terrestrial conservation in South Africa and how conservation is a job creator in the rural areas. Please go ahead, Buyi.
Thanks, Thembisa. Hi, everyone. Today, I'm here to share the story of the Somkanda community and how they dedicated a portion of their land to conservation for its protection and the conservation of their rich history, their rich culture, their biodiversity, the ecosystems that support this community for today and for future generations. So to start, I would have to begin from telling the South African story. In South Africa, we have 3 biodiversity hotspots out of the 36 that exist in the world. South Africa is a mega diverse country, which is ranked number 3. So the hotspot is not defined by the numbers or the facts, but it's actually defined by the rate at which we are losing our biodiversity. And currently, 18% of our natural habitat has been lost, and over 40% of our terrestrial ecosystems are under threat. The story of biodiversity is not only a South African story, but it's a global tale. So to slow down and to stop the destruction, this can only be driven by us, the people of the land. So going into a little bit about Somkanda. Somkanda is a 12,000 hectare reserve located in northern KwaZulu-Natal. How the people of the Gumbi received this land was through the land proclamations process after the apartheid government was abolished. Today, Somkanda is a Big Five reserve protecting some of the world's critically endangered black and white rhino, wild dog, lion, and elephant. So how did the people benefit from the land? Back in 2005, the traditional authority known as the Imvogweni Community Trust set aside 3/4 of the land for conservation. So Wildlands collaborated with the traditional authority to assess and guide on the best practices for land use and management to restore the degraded land which had been used for cattle and subsistence farming. So the Wildlands programs, again in collaboration with other like-minded organizations, including government, came in, worked at Somkanda, and the land began to recover. The people were trained, and now, today, they are employed as game rangers, trails guides, chefs, and general hospitality staff. Further to that, the community members now have access to water for themselves and their livestock. They have gained access into the green and the biodiversity economy, which benefits them again. So, we should use Somkanda as the roadmap for rural development because currently there is a high percentage of rural land that isn't suitable for agriculture. And if we were able to get these communities into the conservation and biodiversity economy, we could start giving them a chance at sustaining themselves. The South African tourism industry currently accounts for 2.8% of real GDP. That is some 139 billion rands annually. Can you imagine what this could do for local rural communities? So the Somkanda example actually illustrates to us the need for us to begin to include people in the restorative and biodiversity economy to enable them to sustain themselves and to develop themselves. So why should South Africa support the 30 by 30 global target? First, sustainability. In order for communities to sustain themselves, they need to be included in the biodiversity economy, in the restorative economy. Secondly, growth potentials. Subsectors in the biodiversity economy, such as tourism and game ranching, are growing at a rapid pace. We need to include our people in these sectors for further job creation. Thirdly, the wildlife economy. South African government has already set aside over 10 million hectares of agricultural land for the development of the wildlife economy. So we are already ahead of the game. Fourth, rural development. Lots of the jobs in the biodiversity sector lie outside urban areas. So if we're able to upskill, empower the people in these rural areas, we are empowering them with much more than what we can imagine. Fifth, labor absorption. Many of the subsectors in the biodiversity economy are labor intensive and require little to low skills. So if we're able to absorb these people from these areas, we are then able to empower them again by infusing them into the labor sector. And finally, there are some other benefits too, and these include water security, healthy ecosystems, clean water, and people who are working and included in other economic sectors of our country. So in closing, the time to act in support to the well-being of our people and the land is now. We implore the South African government to support the 30 by 30 global target in the protection of its people and its land. We love our South Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bui. Next, we'll hear from Rashid Sumaila, who will be sharing his expertise about marine protection and its positive impacts on ecosystems and livelihoods. Please go ahead, Rashid.
I am Rashid Sumaila, professor and Canada researcher in interdisciplinary oceans and fisheries economics at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. I'm here to let you know a few things about the ocean, and the first point I want to make is that if you care about the well-being of people everywhere in the world, and in particular in Africa, then you better work and make all the contributions you can make to ensure that we sustain our oceans everywhere in the continent of Africa and everywhere for the benefit of people. Yeah, so that is the first one. The second thing is that we are currently facing a biodiversity crisis, both on land and in aquatic systems. We are overdoing things, we are overtaking, we are overpolluting, and we need to do something to stop this. And one of the great suggestions that have come recently is to create marine protected areas, and we are moving to have a target that by 2030, 30% of both land and aquatic systems, the ocean and other aquatic systems, are protected. This is based on science that shows that we need to protect at least 30% of our ocean in order to buy insurance against mistakes and errors and abuse, if you like, even. So that's the 30 by 30 target, and we need to move fast because we are lagging behind. At the moment, the world protects only a fraction of that, and we need to do more. One bright spot is South Africa, actually, in the continent of Africa, where 15% of the ocean surface is now protected. That is double the global average. This is a good example for other African countries and for the world. So well done, South Africa. Keep going. Hopefully by 2030, you would have 30% of your land and ocean protected, and not only you, other African countries and countries around the world. And this is important for the economics. When we talk about protecting nature, people think this is counter to economic development. Actually, if you care about long-term economic development that also impacts our children and grandchildren, you protect nature, because nature supports a lot. Up to $125 trillion worth of critical ecosystem services have been estimated to support and pump the rest of the economy. So this is vital, it's foundational to our economy. In fact, this is so important. The former Prime Minister from Africa is advocating for Africa to aim to be the conservation continent of the world. That is a continent that shows how people and nature can live together in harmony and in ways that produces the benefits for us through time, to what I call infinity fish or infinity ocean. So protecting the ocean is protecting your economy. My final point is that to do all this, we need finance. We need internally generated African finance, but also the international community led by the high-income countries, I think, have an obligation to step to the plate, contribute to the continent so that together we can generate the funds needed to create 30% MPAs by 2030 to support the sustainability of our natural systems and therefore the sustainability of our livelihoods. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Rashid. We'll now move on to the Q&A portion of our event. We'll be joined by all the speakers with the exception of Sineguguzukulu, who unfortunately will not be able to join us for this segment. I invite all the attendees to submit questions in the webinar chat or the Q&A box. Please enter your name, media outlet or organization, and your question and to whom you're addressing the question to. First, we have a question for Merrisa. Merrisa, why does the 30 by 30 goal resonate so much with the youth in South Africa, and particularly right now?
Thank you so much for that question, Thembisa, and thank you to the people at home that are watching and I think supporting this. So firstly, I would like to say, Thembisa, I think young people today are increasingly becoming more conscious and are more woke when it comes to the preservation and the protection of our environment. We now recognize that it is our collective responsibility as a youth to be the generation that essentially steps up to the plate, and if not for our present, then for our future. And for the youth of South Africa, Thembisa, I think this is no different. We are extremely proud of the natural treasures that our country has. And we understand that in order for our future to thrive, nature has to thrive and succeed. And this can only be done through safeguards, and this may include marine protected areas as well. And if that wasn't enough, Thembisa, I think in the statistics itself, there are almost 398 young people from South Africa and Africa, representing the Youth for Marine Protected Areas, whose vision is to have a sustainable future where marine life and society benefits from the presence of MPAs and protected areas. So by showing our solidarity support for the global 30 by 30 goal, I think this is important not only for us, but for the future generations to come. Thank you for that question.
Merrisa, thank you so much for answering that question. And now I have a question for Ruth. Ruth, you mentioned that growth is only real and possible only when it's shared with nature. How can protecting nature fuel more growth in the South African GDP?
Thank you for that question, Thembisa. So firstly, as I said in my presentation a few minutes ago, there must be a determination to protect nature. And this would be through stronger laws and stronger enforcement. We know that South Africa is hailed across the world for its laws, including our amazing constitution, and there must be a determination to enforce. Part of the reason why I think there's been a delay in a commitment to more protection of nature and a slow growth of South Africa's GDP is there is a failure to actually enforce protection on the ground. So this would be, for example, lack of effective management of our existing marine protected areas. So if we have the determination to enforce protection with urgency, we'll actually have the ability to give nature the attention that it rightfully deserves. And just to read a couple of things to you, the economic benefits of protecting land and sea actually translates into the support for fisheries and game farms, and also for every rand that we invest in nature, the return is actually 5 times the investment. I think back to the South African National Biodiversity Institute report, where it was reported that 418,000 jobs are directly related to biodiversity. And so if we actually expand protected areas, there's a potential to push this number up to 650 jobs. So in summary, I think just to answer that question, we need to prioritize protection using the actual laws that we have. And this will give us the ability to give nature the attention that it rightfully deserves. And also we need nature to thrive economically. So fueling more growth is not only in the best interests of nature, but also in the best interests of all who live in South Africa.
Thank you so much for answering that question, Ruth. Merrisa, it looks like I have another question for you. Can you answer how 30 by 30 now is engaging governments at a national, provincial, and local levels to push forward for more better conserved areas?
Sorry, Thembisa, would you mind repeating the question?
Okay, Merrisa. Can you answer how the 30 by 30 now is engaging governments at a national, provincial, and local level in pushing for more and better conserved areas?
Okay, so I can answer that question from a youth perspective. Currently, we have youth representatives from different parts of South Africa, from their own organizations that have come together and are trying to develop their own unique campaign in order to try and mobilize the South African government. And that is also in support of the 30 by 30 Now campaign that's currently going ahead. So from a youth angle, that is what we are trying to do, and hopefully get a seat with the minister as well during our actions and activations that we try and achieve through this campaign. So that is how we are trying to achieve things from a youth perspective.
Thank you so much, Merrisa. And do you have anything to add to that?
Thanks, Thembisa. I'd like to maybe just add a bit of a different perspective in terms of why it's important to approach biodiversity conservation as a way to fully integrate and respect Indigenous leaders and rights. So to have local buy-in is absolutely crucial when starting to have these type of discussions, because the people are benefiting directly from the land. So if they are going to give up their utilization rights, they need these to be replaced with other forms of development so that they are not prejudiced for investing in global biodiversity. So I was reading an article online on global advisors, and they were talking about a term which referred to biocultural diversity. And this was described as the cultural knowledge, innovations, practices of indigenous peoples and local communities that they are for nature, they are for conservation and sustainability. And they refer to an example from the first International Congress of Ethnobiology in Brazil, where indigenous people, scientists, environmentalists all came together to have a strategy on how they can halt the decline of global diversity for both nature and culture. And this was very indicative that there's definitely a link between cultural and biological diversity. And this is where the role of the indigenous people becomes really important when beginning to engage the local people and the indigenous authorities or the local authorities, cultural authorities, when beginning to know, to discuss how they can further protect the land, but include and be inclusive of the local people, because African culture and the protection of it actually is part of why and how we can conserve our natural biodiversity.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for answering that question. I have a question for Enric from Cherie Beggar from Mail and Guardian. And it goes, the Department of Fisheries, Forest and Environment says that National Protected Areas Expansion Strategy aims to conserve 36% of the country's total terrestrial areas and marine areas, which should be representative of all biomes. If we already have these targets in place, why is it important for South Africa to put its weight behind this campaign? Very important question.
Thank you, Thembisa. Well, if these targets are there, this is fantastic. It's great news. But you know what happens in South Africa doesn't stay in South Africa. What happens in other countries doesn't stay in other countries. There is no way we are going to be able to sustain our human population and have a prosperous life if not all countries implement these targets, because it is in the benefit of South Africa to have every other country in the world, especially the big countries with the big land masses, the big carbon sinks, to act together, to be able to preserve these carbon sinks, to be able to preserve all the nature that provides all these benefits to humanity and the rest of life on the planet, because one country alone cannot achieve the global outcome that we need. So we need all countries on board. This is why South Africa's leadership, especially if South Africa already has these targets exceeding the at least 30% goal, this is why South Africa should lead and show the way and make sure that every other country in the world commits to a target that is not going to stay within national boundaries, but is actually going to affect the entire planet and all of humanity.
Thank you so much for answering that question, Enric. Let's hope Cherie got that. Now, the next question is for Buyi, and it's from Sachin Skorji. I hope I said that correctly. What is the biggest stumbling block or barrier to South Africa supporting the 30 by 30 goal? Do we need to give examples, or do we need to show how the biodiversity sector can generate revenue to support the goal?
Sorry, can you just repeat that question a bit slower? Thank you.
Okay, I'll repeat the question and a lot slower.
Yeah.
What is the biggest stumbling block or barrier to South Africa supporting the 30 by 30 goal? Do we need to give examples, or do we need to show more how the biodiversity sector can generate revenue to support the goal?
Thanks, Thembisa. So from my understanding, I think the biggest stumbling block for South Africa right now is the debate between the political debate, economic debate, and whether they are for, where they're able to find the balance so that they can satisfy everybody. And unfortunately, it's a very difficult one because as one of the panelists did say that, in Africa, we have a lot of challenges which include corruption, and I think that's probably our biggest stumbling block, and putting economic gains ahead of conservation gains. So I think the best way to go forward would be to give examples of how there has been economic gains in various protected areas right now, currently today. And I can give you those examples today, and most of them are based in northern KwaZulu-Natal. Just maybe what I can start off with is that Somkhanda is just a super unique example because what the Wildlands team has done is that they have kind of integrated the local authorities and the traditional authorities into the whole process and capacitating them so that they are part of the process. So the people there are not just passively benefiting from having a protected area or living adjacent to a protected area, but they're able to actually sustain themselves even far beyond when conservation organizations are still there. So some of the examples that I'd like to put forward would be Pindergame Reserve. This is a protected area which was received via land claims a few years ago, and the local authorities or the indigenous people then agreed to lease the land to a private tourism operator. And how the community are now benefiting from this is that there's been infrastructure development, job creation, schools being built in that area. So they are, benefiting, but this is a passive beneficiation, which we would rather encourage that the people would be more involved in these type of developments. Dembe Elephant Park is another one. This is also in the northern KwaZulu-Natal area, close to the Mozambican border. And this is a 30,000 hectare reserve, which is managed in partnership with KZN Ezemvelo. And again, here, the local people are benefiting from the long-term investment of their land into conservation and tourism. Yeah, I think for the interest of time, I think those examples should be enough. But I mean, I'm more than happy to engage him further outside of this platform.
Thank you so much, Bui, for that answer. Here's a question from Enric and Rashid, and it's from Fanny Duplessis from BirdLife South Africa. And it says, are there any carrot and stick strategies being developed globally to motivate government's compliance with this initiative?
Okay, well, if I may start, the carrots are very clear. It's the economic benefits that more protection of nature is going to give South Africa and every country. Today, in South Africa, there are more than 400,000 biodiversity-related jobs. And as I said before, every one of these jobs makes possible 5 other jobs in economic sectors that use biodiversity. So the benefits far outweigh the costs. So that should be a big enough carrot, but also finance is increasing for biodiversity and specifically for 30 by 30. And governments, philanthropies, the private sector, they all have committed to increase their financing for biodiversity. And last year at the UN General Assembly, a bunch of donors of philanthropies got together and committed $5 billion to protect and conserve 30% of the planet by 2030 by supporting protected areas and indigenous stewardship of their territories. So there is a lot of commitment, financing commitment, which I think should be a big enough incentive. And in terms of sticks, I don't think we need sticks. The threat of the loss that our society, our economies are going to suffer if we continue destroying nature should be a big enough stick, a big enough deterrent against committing to preserve our life support system.
Yeah. So if I may add, thank you, Enric, and it's always good when we tag on each other. Yeah. So in terms of sticks, I'm not aware of any, but in other sectors, governments have put on sticks. One is IUU fishing, for example. The EU has a stick that if you don't take care of IUU fishing, you cannot sell in their market. But we haven't gotten that with MPAs. And now, with carrots, and like Enric said, that is more common. So I'll give some concrete examples in line with what Enric said. Palau is known to have conserved a very large part of its EEZ from fishing, from industrial, from large-scale fishing. They allowed indigenous fishing to do it, which is already a benefit to the locals, right? You keep the benefits at home. And the second thing is that it has actually led to an increase in ecotourism, right? Green tourism. I know COVID has dampened this, but it's going to come back, hopefully in a more greener way. If we think well and use COVID as a breeder to really develop more green ecotourism, that is a carrot. That is the market that is giving Palau that benefit. The second example is from Africa, the Seychelles. The international finance, has been developing carrots for countries to do. So, for example, in the Seychelles, the national debt, the Seychelles, like many African countries, actually pay quite a chunk of what they earn to service debt. And so international finance, working with the NGO, developed with the Seychelles a mechanism to reduce the national payment of debt, and then to use that money to actually support conservation of the ocean in the Seychelles. That is a beautiful international finance example. So we need to develop them more. And for Africa, I don't think we should even think of sticks, actually. We should think of carrots, because the continent has taken a lot already. So we should give Africa more carrots to get Africa to do the right thing for conservation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Enric and Rashid, for answering that question. This is a question from the Engineering News for Enric, or anyone who's prepared to answer it for that matter. How do we identify the correct habitats to protect? It's a big question.
Enric, you want me to go?
Yes, please, Rashid.
Go ahead.
I know Enric will give you the more ecological, clear direction here. I will combine the ecology and the economics, right? If ecologists look at it, they are going to pick out places where the biodiversity is very vulnerable and rich, and we need to protect them, right? That is great. Now, economics comes and says, where are the areas in the ocean that will be threatened more by economic activity, and there are various ways to identify this. I won't be able to tell you that. Now, when you layer the economics and the ecology, that will then identify areas that are rich in biodiversity and that are also most vulnerable because of economic activity. And that will then give you the places to protect most, dealing with both sides of the equation. And our group at UBC, we've been working on this and developing protocols to identify these areas. Yeah.
In addition to what Rashid just said, we already have enough science to know which areas are going to deliver the biggest benefits to people. And last year, for example, we published a study with scientists and economists from all around the world, showing that if we protect the right 30% of the ocean, we will not only preserve the marine life that provides all the benefits we get from the ocean, but also that will help us reduce carbon emissions at a level similar to the emissions of global aviation every single year. But also, protecting the right 30% of the ocean would increase the global fishing catch, because what fisheries management is doing is preventing the further loss, right? Doing a little less bad, but that doesn't regenerate the ocean. This is why we need these areas set aside where marine life comes back and produces many more babies that will help regenerate the areas around. So if we protect the right areas from fishing, the spillover of fish from these areas is going to exceed the foregone catch. So actually, we're going to get a net gain in fishing catch and stronger food security. And we already have the science to know which are the areas that protected will optimize all these benefits for people.
Yeah, Madam Chair, can I just add something? I think this is important. All
Yes,
right, should I go? Yeah. So we, the ocean is divided into country waters. South Africa, from the coast to 200 nautical miles is South African waters. The country manages that. Then you have the high seas, anything over that around the world. That's a large part of the global ocean, 2/3 of the global ocean, and 50% of the surface of the earth. So that's huge. Now, if you want to protect quickly, and I'm saying this quickly, not thinking of the administrative side, from the science and the economics, that is the place to close. Close the whole high seas to fishing. Turn it into a fish bank. Enric, we've done work on this. Turn it into a fish bank. And the benefit from that is huge, especially for a continent like Africa. Why? Then you protect that part. When the fish go there, they go in and out, especially the big tunas. When they go in there, they get peace, they get freedom, they produce more, their eggs flow into the ocean. And so you protect biodiversity, good for biodiversity, good for economics, because you don't have to run around. Remember, only about 5 or 8% of the total catch comes from this 2/3 of the ocean. So think of the carbon they pump out and all the such. Actually, it's not economically feasible. 54% of them, of the areas in the high seas, will not be profitable without subsidies. So you close this, you do good for biodiversity, you do good for economics, do good for climate change, and only 8% take about 70% of the benefit. Eight countries, right? China, Spain. So African countries don't operate there at all. You close it, the fish will come, and Guinea-Bissau will be able to catch fish. Togo will be able to catch fish. Beautiful idea. Good for biodiversity, good socially, good economically. Hey, let's go for it. Africa, back that up. South Africa, can you take that as one of your missions? I will be happy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rashid and Enric. That was a very big question, and I'm hoping that all our speakers are able to engage outside of this forum, maybe. Here's another question for you and Enric, Rashid, and it's from Cherie from the Mail and Guardian, and it says, a recent study published in Nature Sustainability found that global area-based targets will require extending protected areas and restoring natural land. And if this expansion restricts agriculture, then the consequences may be felt in food production sectors with reduced food provisioning, potentially compromising food security. Sorry, it's a mouthful. And human health, particularly in vulnerable regions. Specifically for our country and continent, how does agriculture fit into this campaign?
Yeah, the worst, definitely there has to be a balance, right? The worst enemy of agriculture is wasting the soil away by bad agricultural practices and overuse of pesticides and fertilizers, and the distraction of the natural habitats around the agricultural areas that actually protect that soil from runoff, right? And in the ocean, the worst enemy of food security is overfishing. Right? And 3/4 of the fish stocks, according to a UBC study, are already overfished. So the best way to ensure food security is to improve the management of agriculture, improve the management of fisheries, and ensure that there are these areas around agricultural areas that protect that soil, that protect that ecosystem from the extreme weather events that are going to become more frequent. But in the ocean, it's to create these protected areas that will help regenerate the rest of the ocean. So there has to be a balance. Right now, there is no balance, and we are trending towards the depletion of more soils, the decline in food security. And this is why 30 by 30 is an essential part of the solution to improve food security for everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, Enric. And the other thing that is a problem is actually if we look outside the sector per se, the food sector, and we look at policy in general. If you think of just subsidies that countries give to sectors that actually do the things Enric has just said, lead to overfishing, lead to the depletion of soils, over-fertilization, and all the stuff, right? We use our taxpayer money to actually support negative activities on nature and people. Subsidies is an example. Fishery subsidies, the WTO is trying now to take the harmful subsidies. They harm the environment and take away food. Our estimate is that we lose about 10 million tons of fish a year because of bad management, because of all the subsidies. That is the equivalent of 10 million mature cows. My people, think about that. You know, the food we're wasting. So that is the subsidies. If we can convert them, let them work for nature and people, that will actually reduce hunger a lot, right? And also improve the health of people. And what is more, 80% of the fishery subsidies, the harmful ones, go to large-scale industrial fishing boats, you know, which is so bad for sustainable development, right? Women don't fish in big boats. Youth don't do that. Man, there's so much we can do at the policy area to help people and nature, and then just thank you.
Thank you so much to Enric and Rashid. There are so many amazing questions that came up in this session, but unfortunately we've come to the end of our briefing. If you'd like to learn more about what you can do to drive change towards the 30 by 30 goal in South Africa, we invite you to join the newly launched South Africa 30 by 30 Now campaign. I'd like to thank everyone again for joining this briefing. I hope you've learned a lot, and I'm sure the link to this briefing will be posted on the Campaign for Nature website. Thank you so much.